How can the exact same idea be used to both liberate a people and, at the same time, brutally oppress another? Well, today we're diving into one of the most powerful forces in modern history, nationalism. And we're going to look at it through the intense and incredibly dramatic story of South Africa.
Okay, so let's get on the same page. At its very core, nationalism is all about identity and self-rule, right? It's this powerful feeling of national pride, this belief that a group of people with a shared story ought to be the masters of their own destiny, in their own country. Simple enough. But here's the big question, the central conflict. Is this powerful force a good thing? A driver of unity and freedom? Or is it a tool for division and exclusion? Honestly, there is no better place on earth to see these two sides collide than in 20th century South Africa. So to really get our heads around this, here's our roadmap. We'll start by looking at how nationalism can be a double-edged sword. Then, we'll examine the two competing visions for the country, see how one of them became the brutal system of apartheid, explore the liberation struggle against it, and finally, witness the birth of a new nation. So, in 20th century South Africa, the stage was basically set for this monumental clash. You had two incredibly powerful, yet fundamentally opposed forms of nationalism growing side by side, each one believing it had the sole right to define the nation's future. And their collision? Well, it would shape everything. On one side, you had Afrikaner nationalism, an ideology that was really born from a sense of defeat and humiliation. And on the other side, you had African nationalism, a movement born as a direct response to colonial domination and racial oppression. Two visions for one piece of land. And this slide, this really lays it all out. Look at the contrast. For African nationalism, the goal was simple: control, protect white power at all costs. For African nationalism, freedom and equality. The ideologies couldn't be more different. One based on white supremacy and racial purity, the other on a vision of a non-racial, democratic society. And their methods? One used the power of the state, the other used the power of the people. This wasn't just a political disagreement. This was a battle for the very soul of the country.
So where did this African nationalism even come from? Well, it grew from this potent mix of loss and fear. Imagine, you've been humiliated after losing a war to the British. You're facing economic hardship as part of the poor white class, and you have this deep cultural fear that your language and identity are just going to be wiped out by English influence. And then you wrap all of that in a religious belief that you are a chosen people with a divine mission. All that fear and ambition got funneled into one place, the National Party.
Now, on the flip side, African nationalism was born from pure oppression. In 1910, the Union of South Africa is formed, and black people are completely excluded. 3 years later, the Land Act strips them of their ancestral lands. You're basically being told you have no power and no home. What's your response? You have no choice but to unite. And out of this desperate need for unity, the organization that would become the African National Congress, the ANC, was born.
All right, this is where the story takes a really dark turn. We've seen these two competing visions. Now we're going to see what happens when one of them wins, seizes power, and starts to systematically remake an entire nation in its own twisted image.
The 1948 election was the tipping point. The National Party campaigned and won on a single, chillingly simple platform: apartheid. It's an Afrikaans word that just means apartness. And just like that, Afrikaner nationalism had the full power of the government to turn its ideology of racial purity into the law of the land.
You see, apartheid wasn't just prejudice. It was a system, a cold, calculated machine built on these four legal pillars. First, the Population Registration Act, which literally classified every single person by race. Then, the Group Areas Act, which carved up the country and led to millions being forcibly removed from their homes. Next, the Pass Laws, which controlled where black South Africans could go, turning them into foreigners in their own country. And finally, the Bantu Education Act, which was designed from the ground up to provide inferior schooling and create a subservient workforce. Each law was another brick in this massive wall of oppression. So as those walls of apartheid went up, African nationalism had to evolve. I mean, the old methods of writing petitions and making polite appeals, they were totally useless against a state this brutal. A new, much more militant era of resistance was about to kick off. And this shift was driven by a new generation of fiery young leaders in the ANC Youth League. We're talking about people like Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, and Oliver Tambo. They looked at the cautious approach of their elders and said, "No more." They pushed the ANC to adopt the 1949 Program of Action. The new strategy? Mass mobilization. boycotts, strikes, and just outright defying these unjust laws.
69. This number, this is a point of no return. On March 21st, 1960, in a township called Sharpeville, police just opened fire on a crowd of unarmed protesters. They were demonstrating against the hated pass laws. 69 people were killed. After Sharpeville, any dream of peaceful resistance was just gone. After Sharpeville, the fight against apartheid blew up into a war on 4 critical fronts. Let's break it down. You had the armed struggle, with the ANC forming Umkhonto we Sizwe, or Spear of the Nation, to carry out sabotage. You had mass action, like the powerful Soweto uprising in 1976, led by a new generation of youth. You had psychological liberation, with leaders like Steve Biko telling people to throw off the mental chains of apartheid and be proud. And finally, you had global pressure. The world finally started to wake up, isolating South Africa with sports boycotts and crippling economic sanctions. It was the combination of all 4 of these that brought the system to its knees. And we absolutely cannot talk about this without highlighting the vital role of women. From the ANC Women's League to massive organizations that could mobilize tens of thousands, women were the absolute backbone of the resistance. They used their networks, their songs, their incredible courage to challenge the apartheid state in ways that were uniquely powerful.
So by the late 1980s, the pressure from all 4 of those fronts was just becoming unbearable. The country was in turmoil, it was an international pariah, the apartheid regime, that massive structure built on Afrikaner nationalism, was finally cracking. They had no choice but to come to the negotiating table.
And then, the impossible started to happen, and it happened fast. In 1990, the world just stops and watches as Nelson Mandela walks free from prison after 27 years. A year later, the core laws of apartheid are officially gone, and by 1994, the world witnessed a true miracle. Millions of South Africans, black and white, standing in line for hours, together, to vote in the country's first ever democratic election. The vision of an inclusive nation was finally becoming real.
And this is the amazing part. This quote comes from the Freedom Charter, a document that was created way back in 1955. It just shows that from the very beginning, the goal of the liberation movement was never about replacing one kind of racial domination with another. The vision was always for a non-racial democratic country where, as it says, South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white.
And so, in the end, the exclusive, oppressive nationalism of apartheid was defeated by an inclusive, liberating one. But that leaves us with one final, profound question. The laws are gone, sure, but what about the scars? How does a country truly heal and build a single, united nation from the ashes of such deep and painful division? That is the challenge South Africa continues to face today.